The galaxy had learned to live with ghosts, the digital specters of forgotten wars and collapsed colonies that whispered on the edge of the comm spectrum, their final, looping messages of distress or defiance becoming a kind of background radiation to the noise of civilization. We called them echoes, the sad, inevitable residue of expansion. But the Karen was no echo. It was a true haunting, a presence that did not cry out in pain, but moved with a cold and silent purpose through the graveyards of the present. It never initiated a battle, never fired a shot that anyone could prove. Yet it was the most feared entity from the Soul Core to the Cathar Dominion's outer tendrils. It appeared only in the aftermath of catastrophe, a scavenger of sorrow. When a freighter fleet vanished in the ion storms of the Cygnus Rift, the first rescue ships would find the Karen already there, a sliver of impossible black against the swirling nebular dust, its hull drinking the light and giving nothing back. When a Dominion battle cluster and a Confederacy patrol tore each other to pieces over a contested moon, the Karen would arrive as the last explosions faded, drifting through the fresh debris field like a carrion bird circling a battlefield. It took nothing, communicated with no one, and when its survey was complete, it would simply dissolve back into the void, leaving behind a silence more profound and terrifying than the violence that had preceded it. Both the Cathar and the human corporate confederacy, locked in their decades-long Cold War of espionage and economic sabotage, accused the other of creating it. To the Cathar, a collectivist species of bioengineered sentience, the Karen was the ultimate expression of humanity's morbid individualism, a rogue weapon steeped in death. To the Confederacy, it was proof of the Dominion's unnatural science, a psychically projected nightmare given form. It was a perfect catalyst for paranoia, its silent visitations pouring fuel on a fire that needed only a spark to consume everything. For me, Dr. Eris Thorne, it was a data anomaly, a ghost in a machine, far larger than any single ship, and I studied it from the safety of my listening post at Epsilon Indy, a quiet academic station where the galaxy's tragedies were rendered down into manageable signals. I was a chronolinguist, an archaeologist of the ether, and my specialty was translating the dead. I sifted through the looping final words of pilots swallowed by black holes and the fragmented data hymns of colony ships whose terraforming engines had failed, finding patterns in the chaos. My life's work was listening to endings. The Karen was just another ending, albeit a recurring one, and I cataloged its appearances with the same detached precision I applied to all my work. A detachment honed by a loss of my own. My mentor, Dr. Elias Vance, had been the one who taught me to hear the music in the static, to see history not in artifacts of stone and metal, but in the faint, decaying waves of energy that told their stories. He had vanished 7 years ago, absorbed by a classified Confederacy research initiative known only as Project Ferryman. Its record sealed and its purpose buried. I tried not to think about the irony of the name. Then came the anomaly at Kepler 186F. It was a Cathar science vessel, the Weaver of Starlight, that had been cataloging stellar phenomena in the Crimson Nebula, a region of contested space. The ship went silent. Then its emergency beacon activated for less than a minute before being violently silenced. Confederacy intelligence claimed it was a catastrophic reactor failure. The Cathar Dominion claimed it was a cowardly Confederacy attack. It was a standard, predictable escalation of rhetoric. 2 days later, long-range observatories confirmed the Karen was on site, a predator drawn to the scent of death. But this time, something new was added to the spectral noise. My deep-range sensors, sweeping the area for any trace of the Weaver's logs, picked up a signal. It was impossibly faint, a ghost's whisper buried under layers of stellar radiation. But it wasn't Cathar. It was human, and it was old. It was a single, repeating line of text, translated into a binary audio loop. No man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. It was Dawn, a pre-space poet Elias had loved, a writer whose work he believed perfectly captured the tragic paradox of the human condition, our desperate need for connection and our terrifying capacity for isolation. The signal was a dead thing, an echo, but it was broadcasting with a strange, deliberate clarity, looping with the persistence of a memory that refused to fade. I spent 48 hours isolating it, cleaning it, trying to find its source within the wreckage, my professional curiosity warring with a cold dread that was coiling in my gut. That dread crystallized into a man named Commander Valerius. He arrived at Epsilon Indy with the unannounced, invasive presence of a state audit, his uniform a stark, clean-lined repudiation of my station's comfortable academic clutter. He was the head of Confederacy Special Projects, the same shadowy division that had swallowed Elias whole. Valerius wasn't interested in poetry. He saw the signal as a key, a piece of Cathar mimicry tech designed to infiltrate human networks. He didn't ask for my help. He conscripted it. My station, my research, my life's work were all requisitioned in the name of Confederacy security. I was now his asset, and my lab became the sterile, humorless bridge of a military operation. "Forget the poem, Doctor," he'd said, his voice flat and devoid of inflection as he watched the signal pulse on my main screen. "It's a wrapper, camouflage. There's something inside it. I want to know what it is, where it came from, how the Cathar are using it against us." So I worked, with his guard standing at my door and his analyst looking over my shoulder. The joy of discovery replaced by the pressure of a ticking clock. The deeper I dug into the signal, the more complex it became. The poetry was indeed a wrapper, a carrier wave for a far more compressed and fragmented data stream. It was like peeling back layers of skin to find the ghost of a skeleton beneath. There were snatches of telemetry, star charts that were years out of date, and then a voice log. It was just a few seconds, horribly distorted by signal decay and radiation, but I would have known that voice anywhere. Core is stable, but the integration, the feedback is. I can hear them all the lost voices, they're so cold. It was Elias. My blood turned to ice in my veins. The man who had taught me how to listen to the dead had become one of them. His voice now a faint echo in the darkness he had so often studied. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Project Ferryman, the Karen, the ferryman of the dead. It wasn't Cathar tech. It was ours. It was his. Valerius was in the lab when I finally broke the last layer of encryption. He leaned over my console, his reflection a pale mask in the screen's glow. As I played the audio fragment, he showed no sign of recognition, his face an unreadable slate. "Whose voice is that?" he demanded. "A ghost's," I whispered, my own voice trembling. Before I could explain, an alert flashed on the tactical display Valerius's team had installed. A priority message flagged from Confederacy High Command. I watched the commander's eyes scan the incoming text, and I saw the barest flicker of something in his otherwise placid demeanor. Might have been surprise, or perhaps it was satisfaction, the look of a man whose darkest suspicions had just been confirmed. A new report had come in from a deep space probe that had been shadowing the Crimson Nebula. The Karen was still there, drifting motionless amid the wreckage of the Cathar vessel. But it was no longer just surveying. The probe's spectral analysis showed it was the source of the broadcast. The ghost ship was calling out, using my mentor's favorite poem as its lonely Maori. desperate refrain. Elias wasn't just a voice in the machine. He was the machine. Valerius straightened up, his eyes turning from the screen to me. His expression was one of predatory focus. The mystery was over, and the hunt was about to begin. "Dr. Thorne," he said, his voice ringing with a newfound authority that sent a chill down my spine. "Your station has been designated a forward command post. We have a new mission objective. You are no longer just analyzing a signal. You are going to help me dissect a god." He gestured to the main viewport, where the star charts were already being updated. A course being laid in for the Crimson Nebula. Our destination was plotted, a direct intercept course. I looked from the cold, determined face of the commander to the pulsing signal on my screen, the last piece of the man I had known. We were going to hunt a ghost, and I, the student who had learned to listen to the dead, was now being forced to help cage the most tragic specter of them all. As the station's modest engines rumbled to life, beginning our slow journey toward the nebula's blood-red glow, a single, horrifying thought consumed me. I wasn't going out there to help dissect a god. I was going to participate in an exorcism, and I feared, with every fiber of my being, that the only way to silence a ghost like Elias Vance was to destroy the last piece of his soul. The silhouette of the Karen was already waiting for us in my mind's eye, a patient darkness on the far side of the sky. The journey to the Crimson Nebula was a slow, suffocating crawl through the empty spaces between the stars. My station, once a haven of quiet contemplation, had become a prison of cold steel and colder stares. Valerius's people were efficient, silent, and ubiquitous. They moved through the corridors with the frictionless purpose of sharks, their dark gray uniforms absorbing the light, their faces set in masks of professional indifference. They replaced my research assistants, recalibrated my sensor arrays for tactical tracking, and locked down my access to the station's core systems. I was the ghost now, haunting my own lab, a necessary but untrusted component in Valerius's machine. He spent most of his time in what used to be my primary observatory, which he had converted into a command center he called the Sanctum. It was a name laced with a level of self-aware irony I would not have thought him capable of. From there, he directed the silent, intricate dance of his operation, his eyes fixed on the ever-nearing stain of red on the star charts. Our relationship, if it could be called that, settled into a tense, unspoken rhythm. He would summon me to the Sanctum, point to a new piece of data, a slight variance in the Karen's energy signature, a shift in the modulation of Elias's looping broadcast, and demand an analysis. I would give him the truth, but never the whole truth. I spoke of signal propagation and quantum entanglement, of the way energy patterns decay over vast distances. But I never spoke of the man I knew. I never told him how Elias used to hum off-key when he was close to a breakthrough, or how the specific cadence of the dawn quote was one he favored when he was feeling particularly melancholic. To Valerius, Elias was a malfunctioning system. To me, he was a memory I was being forced to weaponize. At night, when the station was running on low power and most of the crew was on their sleep cycle, I began my own work. My system access was limited, but Valerius had underestimated a lifetime spent coaxing secrets from encrypted fragments. He had locked the doors, but I knew the architecture of the house. I began to hunt for Project Ferryman. The official records were a digital fortress, held with the highest level of Confederacy security clearance. But data, like water, always leaves a trace. I searched for the ghosts of the project, the budgetary overflows, the personnel transfer requests, the requisitions for esoteric components that had no place on a standard military procurement list. I found them in the redacted logs of the EO research facility, a place officially dedicated to studying long-term cryostasis. I found whispers of a neural synthetic interface and a bioquantum core. It was a language of creation, not destruction. They hadn't been building a weapon. They had been trying to build a new kind of explorer. The pilot's mind wouldn't just fly the ship. It would become the ship. They would be able to navigate the chaotic, data-saturated environments of stellar nurseries or the event horizons of black holes, their consciousness processing trillions of data points simultaneously, their human intuition guided by the cold logic of a machine. It was a beautiful, horrifyingly ambitious idea, and it was Elias's dream. I found his initial proposal buried 3 layers deep in a subfile I accessed through a back door in the station's archival server. His name was redacted, but the prose, the elegant fusion of scientific rigor and poetic wonder, was unmistakably his. He wrote of creating a true partnership between man and machine, a way to touch the face of the universe without the clumsy filter of technology. The ship would be an extension of the soul. But there was a second file, a series of addendums written by a different hand. The language was stark, clinical, stripped of all wonder. It spoke of tactical applications, of the pilot's ability to process battlefield data, to predict enemy movements, to identify and neutralize threats before they even materialized. It was the language of Valerius. He hadn't just been assigned to hunt the Karen. He had been one of its architects, twisting Elias's dream of exploration into a nightmare of warfare. The final log entry I managed to decrypt was a psych evaluation of Elias, dated 2 weeks before his disappearance. The assessing officer noted his unparalleled genius, but raised concerns about his profound, empathic response to historical data. He felt the echoes of the past too keenly. He was susceptible to their sorrow. The recommendation was clear, Dr. Vance is an unsuitable candidate. His emotional sensitivity poses a significant risk of cognitive bleed and psychological fragmentation during full integration. The recommendation was signed by Commander Valerius. He had known Elias was the wrong man, that his soul was too open, too soft for the machine they were building, and he had pushed him into the crucible anyway. As we drew closer to the nebula, the Karen signal grew stronger, and I began to hear new things within it. Using my private sub-processors, I designed a filter to listen past the dawn quote to the spaces between the words. There were other voices there, impossibly faint. They were Cathar, fragmented sensor readings, the final panicked chirps of the engineering hive, the low thrumming of their ship's life support failing. Elias wasn't just broadcasting his own pain, he was collecting the pain of others. The feedback he had mentioned in his log. He hadn't been hearing the voices of the human dead from wars long past. He was hearing the fresh ghosts, the ones being made right in front of him. The Karen wasn't a scavenger, it was an ark, a silent, flying tomb collecting the last moments of the lost, preserving them from the indifference of the void. He wasn't a ferryman for the dead, he was their reluctant shepherd. When we finally arrived, the Crimson Nebula was more beautiful and more terrible than any star chart could convey. It was a vast, swirling ocean of hydrogen gas, lit from within by the fierce blue-white light of newborn stars. And hanging in its heart, like a drop of ink in a glass of wine, was the Karen. The wreckage of the Weaver of Starlight was scattered around it, a field of crystalline shards and twisted organic structures that glittered in the stellar light. It was a scene of both cosmic grandeur and intimate violence. The ship was smaller than the legend suggested, a blade of pure, featureless black. It had no visible bridge, no viewports, no weapon emplacements. It was a seamless whole, a perfect shape for cutting through the universe. And it was utterly still. It knows we're here. Valerius said, his voice a low hum beside me in the sanctum. The entire command crew was at their stations, the air thick with anticipation. Its energy signature is watchful. It's not a predator. Commander. I said, my voice barely a whisper. It's a witness. He gave me a sideways glance, a flicker of irritation in his eyes. It is a failed experiment, Doctor. A rogue asset. And we are here to decommission it. He gave a curt nod to his tactical officer. Power up the dampener. Slave its targeting matrix to Dr. Thorne's console. I want it tuned to the specific frequency of Vance's neural pattern, not the ship's systems, not the Cathar echoes he's collected. I want the man. A low hum began to fill the sanctum as a massive device, a ring of concentric silver coils, was deployed from the station's underbelly. The cognitive dampening field. It was an elegant weapon, a tool for a bloodless execution. It wouldn't destroy the ship. It would just erase the ghost, severing the link between Elias's consciousness and the bioquantum core. It would leave the Karen an empty shell, a prize for Valerius to haul back to Io. My hands hovered over my console. The screen displayed a swirling, chaotic representation of the Karen's internal monologue, the Dawn quote, the Cathar whispers, Elias's own fragmented thoughts. It was a symphony of sorrow. My task was to isolate a single instrument, the faint, wavering piccolo of my friend's mind, so that Valerius could silence it forever. Doctor. Valerius's voice was sharp, impatient. Pinpoint the source. Now. I looked at the screen, at the visual representation of a soul in torment, and I saw a new pattern emerge, a faint subroutine I hadn't noticed before. It was a command protocol, buried deep within the noise, repeating over and over again. It wasn't a cry for help. It wasn't a threat. It was a warning. They are coming. I cannot stop them. Quarantine is the only solution. He wasn't talking about us. He was talking about what had destroyed the Weaver of Starlight. It wasn't a reactor failure, and it wasn't a Confederacy attack. Something else was out here in the nebula with us. Something the Karen had come to observe, to record, and perhaps to contain. My fingers touched the console. I had a choice. I could follow the order, betray Elias, and hand Valerius his prize, perhaps saving us from the commander's wrath. Or I could try to understand the warning, to listen to the ghost instead of helping to exorcise it. The hum of the dampener grew louder, a hungry, waiting sound. Dr. Thorne, Valerius warned, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Do not test my patience. I looked at the black shape hanging in the red mist of the nebula and made my choice. My fingers moved across the console, not with the precision of a surgeon isolating a nerve, but with the deliberate misdirection of a stage magician. Valerius wanted me to pinpoint Elias's consciousness, the source of the rogue asset. He saw a single, flawed component in a machine. I saw a chorus of ghosts, a mind fractured by a grief too vast to contain, and I was not about to hand him the conductor's baton. Instead of isolating Elias's neural signature, I began to amplify it. I rerouted a fraction of my station's processing power, not to the dampener's targeting matrix, but back into the signal I was broadcasting. I didn't try to communicate, not in words. I sent him data. I sent him the raw, unfiltered telemetry of our own approach, the energy signature of the dampening field, the low-frequency hum of our station's life support. I sent him a picture of us, a mirror image of their own silent observation. We see you. I see you. Valerius, oblivious, watched his tactical display, waiting for the targeting lock I was supposed to provide, "What's the delay?" "Doctor," he snapped, his voice tight with controlled fury. "The energy patterns are unstable." I lied, letting a cascade of meaningless diagnostic code scroll across my secondary monitor for effect. The Cathar echoes are creating a feedback loop. I need to build a new filter to isolate his signature from the background radiation of the dead. It was just enough technobabble to placate him for a few precious seconds. He grunted, a sound of profound annoyance, but he did not question my methods. To him, I was a tool, and a tool was expected to perform its function, however arcane its inner workings. Outside, in the crimson depths of the nebula, the Karen reacted. Its seamless black hull, which had been passively absorbing the light of the newborn stars, began to shimmer. A faint, internal luminescence pulsed just beneath its skin, a soft, mournful blue that stood in stark contrast to the nebula's violent red. The dawn quote, which had been looping with the steady metronomic rhythm of a machine, began to fracture. The words stuttered, overlapped, and then fell silent. The silence was more alarming than the broadcast. It was a held breath. Then, a new signal washed over us. Not a broadcast, but a direct focus transmission aimed squarely at our station. It was a single, massive data packet. Valerius's comms officer shouted a warning. "Sir, unidentified data stream bypassing our firewalls. It's a visual log." From the Cathar ship, on the main view screen in the sanctum, the image of the Karen was replaced by a scene of utter chaos. The footage was from the bridge of the Weaver of Starlight. Its crystalline walls and gracefully curving consoles now shattered and scorched. Cathar bodies, their chitinous exoskeletons cracked and broken, lay scattered across the deck. But they hadn't been killed by explosions or weapon fire. They had been unmade. Their forms seemed to have been twisted, their very biological structure warped by some unseen force. And then I saw it. In the corner of the frame, clinging to a fragment of a bulkhead, was a shape. It was not Cathar. It was not human. It was something utterly alien. A shifting, geometric impossibility of black angles and non-Euclidean curves. It seemed to absorb the light around it, creating a pocket of absolute nothingness in the dying light of the Cathar bridge. As we watched, it pulsed, and one of the dead Cathar crew members dissolved, not into dust or ash, but into a shower of what looked like raw information. A brief, glittering cloud of binary code that the black shape seemed to inhale. This was what Elias had seen. This was the threat he was warning us about. It wasn't a ship or a creature in any conventional sense. It was a predator that fed on information, on the very patterns that constituted life and consciousness. It didn't just kill, it erased. The log ended as the shape turned toward the Cathar's internal sensor array, and the feed dissolved into a blizzard of static. The sanctum was silent, the only sound the faint hum of the station systems. The faces of Valerius's crew were pale, their military composure finally cracking in the face of something so profoundly outside their understanding. "What in God's name was that?" the tactical officer whispered. Valerius stared at the screen, his face a mask of cold, analytical fury. The fear that touched his crew did not touch him. He saw only a new variable, a new threat to be cataloged and neutralized. He saw a rival predator. "It's a weapon," he said, his voice dangerously soft. The Cathar were transporting it. It got loose. The Karen wasn't drawn here by the disaster. It was tracking the weapon. He turned to me, his eyes burning with a terrifying intensity. Vance's warning, the quarantine. He was trying to keep this thing contained within the nebula. He's been acting as a warden. My blood ran cold. The cairn hadn't just been a silent ark for the dead, it had been a cage. Elias had positioned himself between this informational parasite and the rest of the galaxy, using his own fractured consciousness as the lock. The blue glow from the cairn intensified. The ship began to move, not toward us, but away, angling deeper into the densest part of the nebula. It was trying to draw the creature away, to lead it on a chase into oblivion. "He's running," Valerius snarled. "He's breaking his own quarantine." He jabbed a finger at his tactical officer. "Target the Charon's drive system. I don't care what that thing on the Cathar ship is. My mission is to secure the rogue asset. Disable it. Now." Plasma coils on the station's exterior began to glow as weapon systems, previously hidden, came online. This was his plan all along. The dampener wasn't for a gentle exorcism. It was to immobilize the mind while the heavy artillery took apart the body. "Commander, you can't," I yelled, stepping away from my console. "You don't understand. Firing on that ship might be exactly what this other thing wants. You could release it, Dr. Thorne. Return to your station, or I will have you removed," Valerius said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "The asset is compromised. The mission has changed from retrieval to termination. He was going to kill Elias. He was going to shatter the cage because he was more afraid of the warden than the monster." As the station's weapons locked onto the fleeing Karen, I did the only thing I could think to do. I sent Elias one last message, not of data, but of words. I accessed my personal logs, found a recording from 7 years ago, from the day I completed my doctorate. It was a message from Elias, his voice warm and full of life, congratulating me. "You did it, Eris," his recorded voice said, a ghost from a happier time. "You learned to listen. Just remember, the goal isn't just to hear the echoes, it's to understand their silence." I wrapped the audio file in the core command protocol for Project Ferryman, the one I'd found buried in the IO archives, the one that initiated a full diagnostic and system reboot. It was a desperate, foolish gamble, a key thrown at a lock I couldn't see. I bypassed Valerius's firewalls and sent it directly to the Charon's core. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The Charon's blue glow flared into an incandescent white, a light so bright it bleached all the color from the nebula. The ship shuddered violently, its smooth hull plates seeming to ripple as if the very metal was in agony. It was rebooting, forcing a hard reset of the entire neural synthetic interface. It was the digital equivalent of a grand mal seizure. Alarms screamed through the sanctum. "What did you do?" Valerius roared, his composure finally breaking as he lunged toward my console. But it was too late. The Charon, in its death throes, had stopped running. It now hung motionless, a beacon of pure white light in the gathering red dark. And from the wreckage of the Cathar ship, the shape of shifting black angles detached itself from the debris. It had been patient. It had been waiting. And we had just, in our infinite arrogance, opened the door to its cage. It began to move toward the paralyzed Charon, not through propulsion, but by simply ceasing to be in one place and beginning to be in another. A flicker in reality itself. It was coming for the mind we had just exposed. A feast of pure, unfiltered consciousness. A soul laid bare. And as it moved, it grew. And I realized with a final, soul-crushing certainty that the wreckage of the Cathar ship was not scattered randomly. It had been arranged. It formed a circle around the Charon, a focusing lens of dead technology and broken bodies, all aimed at the center. The Karen hadn't been the warden of a prison. It had been the bait in a trap. And Elias, my friend, my mentor, was about to be the sacrifice. The black shape, the anomaly, was a wound in reality. It did not fly so much as it bled across the distance between the Cathar wreckage and the paralyzed Charon. The space around it warped, the starlight of the nebula bending and distorting as if passing through flawed, ancient glass. It was a predator of concepts, and its prey was a mind laid bare. "Fire!" Valerius commanded, his voice a blade of ice cutting through the terrified awe that had frozen the sanctum. "All batteries! Concentrate fire on the entity. Full spread!" The station shuddered as its plasma cannons unleashed a torrent of incandescent energy. Bolts of white-hot matter crossed the void in an instant, converging on the anomaly. But they did not strike it. They passed through it. The bolts emerged from the other side, visibly dimmer. Their energy leached away and continued on to splash uselessly against the nebula's dust clouds. The anomaly did not even pause. It was like trying to shoot a hole in a shadow. It's feeding on the energy. I said, my voice numb. My gaze was locked on the Karen, on that beacon of pure white light that was my friend's soul, exposed and screaming in the darkness. My gamble had failed. I hadn't saved him. I had served him up on a platter. "Then we use something it cannot feed on," Valerius retorted, his mind already adapting, calculating. He turned to me, his eyes devoid of accusation, filled only with a terrifying, pragmatic clarity. "Doctor, your reboot protocol. You opened a door to the ship's core. Can you get back in?" I stared at him, confused. What for? To talk to it? It's too late. The Karen is a bioquantum system. It is part machine, part mind. Its consciousness is not just a passenger. It is an integral component of its operation. Right now, that component is in shock. It is unspooled, but the hardware is still there. Your friend's mind is the software. I need you to get in there and force it to reboot again. But this time, under control. Tell it to do whatever it needs to do to defend itself. It was the most insane, desperate order I had ever heard. He was asking me to perform psychic surgery on a ghost in the middle of a battle against an impossible enemy. But as I looked at the anomaly, now only minutes away from its prize, I knew it was the only path left. "I'll need a direct neural interface," I said, my mind racing, in full access to the station's comms laser. "I need to piggyback a signal on a carrier wave strong enough to penetrate the Karen's rebooting firewalls." Valerius simply nodded at his engineering officer. "Give him whatever he needs. And get the dampener back online. Recalibrate it. I want a perimeter, a wall of cognitive static around the Karen. If Thorne can't wake Vance up, we're going to at least make the meal as indigestible as possible." The next few minutes were a blur of focused, frantic activity. They strapped me into a crash couch in my own lab, a neural lace headset lowered over my temples. The cold gel of the contact points made me shiver. On the screen in front of me, a technician brought up the interface. It wasn't a keyboard and mouse. It was a visualization, a gateway into a sea of pure data. My task was to dive in and find Elias in the storm. "Interface is live," the technician said, his voice tinny in my ears. "We're slaving your neural patterns to the laser. Godspeed, Doctor." I closed my eyes and pushed. The transition was not a physical sensation, but a cognitive one. I was no longer in my lab. I was standing on the shore of a roiling, chaotic ocean under a sky of static, and the waves that crashed at my feet were made of raw data, and they whispered with the voices of the Cathar, the last desperate cries of 1,000 other forgotten tragedies. This was the inside of the cairn. This was Elias's mind. In the distance, a vast, dark structure rose from the sea, a library of impossible size, its towers reaching into the static-filled sky. It was a beautiful, terrible sight. The walls were made of memories. The windows were fractured log entries, and the entire structure groaned under the strain of the storm. This was the ark he had built, a sanctuary for the ghosts he had collected, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that he was inside, drowning in the sorrow he had tried to save. I waded into the data stream, the Cathar whispers clinging to me like cold seaweed, and began to walk toward the library. The closer I got, the more violent the storm became. Fragments of Elias's own memories flew past me like shrapnel the day he first saw the schematics for the Quran. His face lit with a child's wonder, a bitter argument with Valerius in a sterile white room, the face of his wife, who had died years before, smiling at him from a photograph. I reached the library's entrance, a great arched doorway where a vortex of screaming binary code swirled like a gatekeeper. I pushed through it, and the sound hit me. It was the sound of every voice he had ever collected, all crying out at once. The inside of the library was a maelstrom. Books, the bound memories of the dead, flew from the shelves, their pages scattering, their stories dissolving into the gale. And in the center of the great rotunda, standing in the eye of the hurricane, was Elias. He wasn't the man I remembered. He was a figure of pale light, a composite of his own memories and the ship's energy, his form constantly flickering, threatening to come apart. He was looking up at the swirling chaos, his arms outstretched not in defiance, but in an attempt to hold it all together, to keep the library from being torn apart. "Elias," I shouted, but my voice was lost in the cacophony. He didn't see me. He was too lost, too broken. I had to find another way. I remembered his last message to me, the real one, from the recording. The goal isn't just to hear the echoes, it's to understand their silence. The silence, the core of him, buried beneath all this noise. I fought my way through the storm, not toward him, but toward the base of the central dais where he stood. There, carved into the floor, was a single image, the only thing in this entire chaotic space that was still and whole. It was a star chart of the Sol system, and orbiting the third planet was a tiny, perfect blue marble. Home. I placed my conceptual hands on the image and poured all of my own memories of him into it, our arguments over coffee, the long nights spent staring at sensor readings, the sound of his laughter. I wasn't adding to the noise. I was creating a silence, a pocket of stillness in the heart of the storm. The figure of light flickered and turned. His head lowered, and his gaze fell upon the star chart, and upon me. For the first time, I saw his face clearly, etched with an eternity of pain. Eris. His voice wasn't spoken. It was a thought, a feeling of pure, astonished recognition that cut through the gale. "I'm here, Elias." I thought back, pouring all the strength I had into the connection, but something is coming. The thing from the Cathar ship. It's outside. It's coming for you. For all of this. I could feel his fear, a new terror that momentarily eclipsed the old sorrow, the erasure. It must not be allowed to feed. I built this place to hold them, to keep them safe. You can't hold them anymore. Elias, I pleaded, projecting the image of the anomaly moving through space, of the dampener field forming a fragile wall around the cairn. The library is breaking. You have to let them go. You have to let the dead bury their dead. A look of profound agony crossed his face. To him, these weren't just data points. They were souls he had sworn to protect. Letting them go was an act of desecration. It's the only way, I urged, feeling a tremor from the outside world as the anomaly began to probe Valerius's defensive field. You have to choose. Let them go, or let it take all of you. Become the ferryman, Elias, not the Ark. Guide them to their final silence. He looked from me to the swirling vortex of ghosts, his form wavering. He was a man being asked to burn down his own soul to save its foundation. He closed his eyes, a single tear of pure light tracing a path down his cheek, and he made his choice. He raised his hands, and with a final, heart-rending cry that was both his and the chorus of 1,000,000 dead souls, he pushed outward. The library exploded. The explosion was not of matter, but of meaning. From my vantage point within the cairn's core, I was at the epicenter of a supernova of souls. The library did not just shatter, it sublimated, turning from a structure of memory into a shockwave of pure, unadulterated experience. 1,000,000,000 lives, 1,000,000,000,000 moments, all released at once. The last laugh of a freighter pilot telling a bad joke seconds before his ship's reactor breached. The crystalline harmony of a Cathar hive song celebrating a new star. The terror and confusion of a colony facing atmospheric failure. Every joy, every sorrow, every mundane observation and profound realization that Elias had so carefully collected was unleashed in a single, incoherent, beautiful, and terrible wave. On the bridge of my station, Valerius and his crew could only watch as the cairn erupted. It was a ghost nova, a silent detonation of light and data. The ship's white-hot glow intensified for a single, blinding second, and then expanded outward in a rapidly growing sphere of ethereal energy. The dampener field, designed to contain the cognitive output of a single the fractured mind, was overwhelmed in an instant. Consoles sparked and screens went dark as the wave of raw, weaponized grief washed over us. A psychic tsunami that carried the weight of 1,000 forgotten tragedies. The anomaly, the erasure, had been moving toward the cairn with the implacable certainty of a predator closing on its helpless prey. It met the expanding wave head-on. This creature, which fed on coherent information, was suddenly force-fed the chaotic, contradictory, and infinitely complex symphony of 1,000,000,000 lifetimes. It was like a black hole trying to swallow a big bang. It could not process the input. The sheer emotional and informational density of the wave was a poison to a thing that existed only to unmake. We watched as the anomaly shuddered, its perfect, impossible geometry beginning to fray at the edges. It tried to retreat, to pull itself out of the torrent of memory, but it was too late. It was saturated. It began to come apart, not violently, but with a strange, quiet unraveling, like a glitch being patched out of the universe. The absolute black of its form fractured into 1,000,000 shades of gray, and then, with a final, silent flicker, it was simply gone. It had not been destroyed. It had been drowned in the very thing it sought to consume. Back in the datascape, the storm had broken. The roiling ocean of voices was calm, a vast, dark sea of glass under a sky now clear of static. In the distance, 1,000,000,000 faint stars began to fade, one by one, like embers cooling in the night. The echoes were finding their peace, their stories finally told. I stood on the shore, the neural link the only thing anchoring me to this place. And I was no longer alone. Elias stood beside me. The figure of tormented light was gone. It was just him, the man I remembered, wearing the old, comfortable tweed jacket he'd favored in his university days. He looked whole and tired and profoundly at peace. He was translucent, a memory given form for a final moment. You learn to listen. Aris, he said, His voice, the one from my recordings, warm and real. You heard the silence beneath all the noise. What did you do? I asked, my own conceptual voice filled with awe. I became the ferryman, he said, looking out at the fading stars. I opened the gates and guided them home. A story is a heavy thing to carry forever. Theirs are over now. He turned to me, a gentle, sad smile on his face. And so is mine. Don't go, Elias, I pleaded, a wave of grief washing over me. We can fix this. We can bring you back. He shook his head, his form growing fainter. This ship was my prison, and then it became my ark. Now, it is just a ship. It needs to be. My work is done. He reached out, and for a moment I felt the phantom sensation of a hand on my shoulder. Don't mourn the echo, Eris. Just remember the song. And then he dissolved, not into light or static, but into the quiet, leaving me alone on the shore of a silent sea. The neural link severed, and I was thrown back into my own body with a violent gasp. The lab was filled with the smell of ozone. A technician was leaning over me, his face pale with concern. Dr. Thorne, can you hear me? I sat up, ripping the headset off. In the sanctum, a stunned silence reigned. Valerius stood before the main view screen, staring at the sight outside. The anomaly was gone. The nebula was quiet, and the cairn remained. But it was changed. Its hull was no longer a perfect, light-devouring black. It was a deep, lustrous gray, like polished stone from a riverbed, its surface seeming to hold the faint, captured light of the distant stars. It was no longer a wound in the sky. It was a monument. It began to move, its engines coming online with a slow, graceful purpose. It turned away from us, toward the unexplored depths of the galaxy, and then, with a flicker of its drive, it vanished into the void. Later, Valerius found me in the observatory, staring out at the star-dusted crimson clouds where it had all happened. We stood in silence for a long time. In my official report, he said finally, his voice low and devoid of its usual iron authority. The rogue asset, Charon, was destroyed in the engagement with the unidentified hostile entity. Its loss was regrettable but necessary to contain a threat of unknown origin. I turned to look at him, surprised. He was covering for Elias. He was letting the ghost go. It was not an asset, I said softly. It was a man for the first time. I saw something other than pragmatism in Commander Valerius's eyes. It might have been regret, or it might have been a form of respect. He was a better soldier than any of us, he said, then turned and walked away, leaving me with the ghosts and the silence. I never returned to my life as a chronolinguist. I could no longer bear to listen only to endings. The legend of the Charon changed after that day. It was still seen, a gray, silent ship appearing in the aftermath of tragedy, but the whispers were no longer of a scavenger or a specter of doom. They spoke of a guardian, a solemn guide. Crews of crippled ships reported their failing systems inexplicably stabilizing just long enough for rescue. Distress beacons that should have been lost in stellar noise were somehow amplified. The Charon no longer collected the dead. It eased the passage of the dying. It had become a true ferryman of the stars, its purpose refined by sacrifice. Sometimes, when I am running deep-range scans and the silence between the stars is at its most profound, I will still pick up a signal from its direction. It is not a voice, not a poem, not a cry of pain. It is just a single paired resonant note that hangs in the void for a moment before fading. It is the sound of a promise kept, the sound of a soul at peace.